You wake up at 3 in the morning in the dark. There, in the corner, is a shape that shouldn't be there. A person standing still, watching you. You flip the light on. It's a coat on a hanger. It was always a coat on a hanger. So imagine this. In the second before that light came on, when your heart was slamming and your whole body had already decided to run, was that fear a mistake? Or did your brain do exactly what it was built to do? This is about the fact that most of what scares us was never actually there. Your brain built it on purpose, out of almost nothing. And it's been running that trick on you your entire life without you ever catching it. That name is pareidolia, and it happens to every single one of us. You got a region in your brain whose entire job is finding faces. It's so aggressive at this job, and it doesn't wait for an actual face to show up. Give it two dots and a curved line, and it fires anyway. That's why a smiley emoji reads as a face in a tenth of a second, and it's why an outlet, the front of a car, or a shadow in the corner of a dark room can suddenly look like it's looking right back at you. And your face detection system is doing exactly what it was designed to do, just a little bit eager to find its target. It's not a glitch. I got a friend who swears her toaster judges her every morning. She's not wrong exactly. She's just describing a piece of bread with two burn marks and a slot, and her brain insisting it has opinions about her life choices. You've done this too. Don't lie to me. Somewhere in your house right now, there's an object with a face you've never told anyone about. I know I do. This is the part that explains basically everything else I'm going to tell you. So, as I like to say, sit with it. Picture yourself at the edge of a dark tree line thousands of years ago, and you catch a flicker of movement. You got two options. Assume it's nothing, keep walking, and be right most of the time, or assume it's a predator, freeze, and be wrong most of the time. Now weigh the actual cost of getting it wrong each way. Assume danger, and it's nothing. You wasted a few seconds of adrenaline. Mildly annoying, completely survivable. Assume nothing, and it's actually a predator. You don't get a second chance to learn from that mistake. So, evolution did the math, and the math is brutal. A brain that cries wolf constantly and survives beats a brain that stays calm and sometimes dies. Every single one of you listening right now is a descendant from the ones who jumped at shadows. The calm ones didn't stick around long enough to pass their genes down. This exact trade off has a name, and once you hear it, the whole idea clicks even harder. Researchers call it the smoke detector principle. A smoke detector is built to go off far more than there's an actual fire, because a false alarm from burnt toast costs you nothing but a little noise. Annoying. A detector turns so precisely that it only ever caught real fires would risk one eventually. And that single miss could cost a life. So every smoke detector on Earth is built to overreact on purpose. Your fear response runs on the same design, just in flesh instead of plastic. It's not broken because it fires over a coat on a hanger. It was never built to be accurate. It was built to be paranoid, because paranoid and alive beats accurate and dead. And if you think about it, it means your body believes burnt toast and a masked intruder deserves the same reaction. Nuance was never the strong suit here. Not dying was. Before we leave faces completely, that specific feeling of being watched from somewhere you can't see deserves its own explanation. The back of your neck prickling in an empty parking lot, the crawling sense someone's eyes are on you from across the room before you even spotted them. You got a dedicated system in your brain to track where other people's eyes are pointed, and it's sensitive. Here's what's important. When that system doesn't have enough information to tell for certain if someone's gaze is on you, it doesn't shrug and default to probably not. A direct stare has historically meant one of exactly two things: someone about to approach you or someone sizing you up as a threat. and missing either one carried real cost. So your gaze detection system was built to guess watched over unwatched whenever it can't be sure. Have you ever turned around, like in a coffee shop, convinced someone was staring at you, made eye contact with a total stranger who was, in fact, just looking at the pastry case behind your head, and had to pretend you were stretching your neck? Blame a few 100,000 years of evolution for refusing to let you enjoy a scone in peace. Push the same system too hard for too long, and it sits at the center of one of the most exhausting things a person can carry. People who live through real trauma describe their threat detection getting stuck fully switched on, unable to relax in rooms that are, by every measure, completely safe. The tragedy is it doesn't know how to stand down once the danger has passed. A car backfiring outside, a door slamming down the hall, someone raising their voice in another room. None of these carry any real threat, and the alarm doesn't consult the facts before it fires. It just fires, the same way it did the day it learned to. This same wiring doesn't only misfire while you're awake staring at a coat. It misfires when you're asleep. For a huge number of people, it builds an entire figure standing over the bed. Somewhere between 30 and 40% will experience this at least once. You wake up, but your body doesn't. You're fully conscious, eyes open, and completely paralyzed because the mechanism that keeps you from acting out your dreams hasn't switched off yet. So tell me in the comments, has that ever happened to you? You wake up and you're totally paralyzed? From what I remember, I've never had that experience, but it's interesting. So, in that strange gap between sleep and awake, your brain is still half running dream logic while your eyes are gathering real information from the room, and it blends the two together. A curtain moving in the dark gets treated as a shape. Your threat detection runs even hotter at night because darkness gives it less real information to work with. And that means more of what you're seeing is your brain filling in the blanks on its own. Almost everyone who goes through this describes the same figure, usually standing, silent, right at the edge of the bed or in the doorway. Different cultures across history gave it different names: hag, a shadow man, demon on a chest, same glitch wearing whatever costume the local folklore handed it. Here's a question for you. If 30 to 40% of everyone listening had had this happen, why does it still feel like a secret every single time? I talk to people who never told a soul about their shadow figure because they assumed they were the only one. And meanwhile, the person sitting next to them on train had the exact same house guest last Tuesday. Humanity's been collectively having the same nightmares for thousands of years, and somehow nobody compares notes. An engineer once accidentally scared himself half to death at work, and the explanation is something I bet you've never had explained to you properly. Back in the 1990s, a lab technician in England kept feeling like something was watching him whenever he worked late. Cold sweats, a heavy, oppressive feeling pressing down on the room. Then one night, out of the corner of his eyes, he caught a gray shape standing in the corner. He turned to face it straight on, and it vanished. He went home terrified. The next day, completely unrelated, he was polishing his fencing sword in a clamp on his workbench when he noticed the blade quivering, shaking, on its own. Even though nothing was touching it, that single detail sent him down a real investigation rabbit hole. He measured the sound in the lab and found a frequency sitting right around 19 cycles per second, well below what human ears can consciously hear. The source turned out to be a newly installed extractor fan creating a standing wave that matched the exact dimension of the room. Once he shut the fan off, the sword stopped moving, and so did the feeling that something was in the room with him. Think about that the next time you watch a paranormal investigator. I don't want to create controversy. I don't believe in the supernatural, but who knows? Anyway, back to this. The reason that specific frequency did what it did comes down to your own body. Our eyeballs has its own natural resonant frequency, sitting close to that same range. When sound at the right pitch hits a person hard enough, it can make the eyeball vibrate a little in its socket, which smears whatever's sitting in your vision into a vague black shape. Look straight at it, and the vibration doesn't line up the same way, so it disappears the second you turn your head. Beyond the eyes, sound in that range can also unsettle your inner ear and your breathing, creating that same heavy, watched, dread feeling that shows up in reports of haunted rooms. He later got called in to check other buildings with a reputation for feeling haunted and found the same kind of low frequency hum sitting in more than one of them. Nobody's claiming every haunted feeling has a fan behind it. What this shows is that your body can create the entire physical sensation of dread and a shape watching you from nothing but sound too low to hear. No ghosts or imagination required, just the wrong frequency in the wrong room. You're lying in bed, drifting on and off, and out of nowhere, you hear an explosion, a gunshot, something slamming, something loud enough to jolt you fully awake, heart pounding. Certain something just happened in a room. Nothing did, and nobody else heard it either. There's a name for this too, exploding head syndrome, and it's a real documented condition, first written up by a neurologist all the way back in the 1870s. Surveys of college students have found close to 1 in 5 report experiencing it at least once. And that makes it a lot more common than the dramatic name suggests, and far from the rare oddity most people assume it is. And yeah, that is the actual clinical name. I didn't make it up to sound dramatic, though I wish I had, because it's the best branding a harmless condition has ever accidentally gotten. Somewhere, a medical committee sat in a room and decided that this was the best name and captured it. And honestly, respect. The leading explanation here is almost the mirror image of what happens with sleep paralysis. As you drift off, your brain works through a shutdown sequence, and normally your visual and auditory neurons quiet down in an orderly way, one system easing off after another. Researchers think exploding head syndrome happens when that shutdown misfires, and instead of powering down smoothly, a cluster of those neurons fires all at once in a single burst. Your brain doesn't experience a burst of neural activity as a burst of neural activity. It experiences it as sound because that's the only language those neurons speak. So the misfire gets translated into an explosion or whatever the loudest thing your brain can reach for in that instant. No ears were involved, and no sound wave ever moved through the room. Your own shutdown sequence produced the loudest thing you heard all week, all from the inside. Ask someone to predict exactly when an approaching sound will reach them, and they'll always think it's arrived while it's still some distance off. Researchers call this the auditory looming bias, and it shows up most strongly in situations where being wrong in the cautious direction costs you almost nothing, while being wrong in the other direction could cost you everything. A sound that might be getting closer gets treated by your brain as closer than it really is on purpose, because a little extra warning built into your perception, even a false one, buys you time you didn't actually earn. This is likely a piece of why footsteps behind you in the dark, or a growl, or anything closing in from behind always feels a beat more urgent than the same sound if it were just sitting still. This one explaining why a human scream cuts through you in a way almost nothing else does, plus sounds that are louder. Normal talking barely flickers at all, just a handful of times per second. A scream flickers dozens of times faster in a narrow band your ear can't smoothly process. So it comes out sounding harsh instead of clean. When researchers played people scream alongside calm speech and artificial alarm sounds while scanning their brains, the roughest sounds, not the loudest ones, lit up the amygdala hardest. Screams also turned out to occupy a strange acoustic lane. Almost nothing else in our communication touches. And it's exactly the same rough flickering pattern that engineers, probably without knowing the research, ended up building into smoke alarms or car alarms, sirens, the purge siren, which I love because it turns out we reliably rate rougher sounds as more frightening regardless of the source. And if it's a person, machine, or nothing organic at all, our brain is primarily responding to volume when a scream hits us. It's responding to that specific rapid flicker turned in by evolution to bypass slow, careful thought and go straight for the fastest reaction our body has. Almost all of us has experienced a milder, more common cousin to both sleep paralysis and exploding head syndrome without ever putting a name to it. That falling sensation right as you drift off, the sudden jerk of your whole body, sometimes paired with a flash of a face, object, or whatever that doesn't belong to any dream you were actually having yet. These are called hypnagogic hallucinations, and unlike sleep paralysis, your body isn't locked in place for them. And unlike exploding head syndrome, they're not a burst of sound. They're just your brain's dream generating machinery switching on a beat too early, while a sliver of your waking mind is still online to witness it. Most people brush past these without a second thought. Some people catch a full on vivid image right as their eyes are closing, gone again in an instant, chalked up afterward to nothing at all. It's the same predicting machine losing its grip on the handoff between awake and asleep, just for a second. A lot of you have probably wondered about those voices people swear they hear buried in static or the hiss between radio stations. Our brain doesn't just hunt for faces in noise, it hunts for language in noise too, for the same reason. Missing an actual warning shouted at us was historically dangerous, so our hearing is tuned to find speech patterns, even in signals that contain none. Play someone random static and tell them to listen for a hidden word, and they'll hear one confidently. And different people will hear completely different words in the same clip because the brain isn't decoding a real message. It's constructing the most likely one out of the noise and expectation. This is the exact machinery some ghost hunting shows lean on when they hand you a burst of static and call it a spirit voice. The static is real. The voice is your own brain doing to your ears what it just did to your eyes. One that isn't hiding in the dark or buried in static at all. One you can see perfectly in full view, and it still churns your stomach. Think of a wax figure that's almost lifelike but not quite. A doll with eyes that track a little too smoothly, or an animated character built to look nearly human, moving in a way that's just slightly off. You can see every detail clearly, and they still crawl under your skin in a way that, let's say, a cartoon character never does. There is a name for this too, the Uncanny Valley, and it was first mapped out by a robotics professor back in 1970. He noticed something strange when designing machines meant to interact with people. As a robot gets more human looking, people like it more, right up until it gets almost fully human. At that specific point, right before it crosses into looking completely real, affection collapses and flips into revulsion. Push the design all the way to fully convincing, and the discomfort lifts again. Plot it on a graph, and you get a steep drop right before the peak, a valley. The leading explanation isn't about darkness, it's about mismatch. Your brain has two separate systems running at once when it looks at a face. One checking, is this human? Another checking does everything about it line up the way a human should. Most of the time, both systems agree instantly, and you never notice them working. A face that's almost human, but not really, trips one system into saying yes, while the other quietly flags something's wrong. Skin that moves oddly, eyes that don't blink at the right rate. Maybe it's an expression, half a second out of sync. That contradiction between two systems that are supposed to agree reads to your brain as a warning sign. Historically, the kind of warning signs that showed up around illness, injury, or a body that wasn't behaving the way a living one should. You're not scared of the doll because it's ugly. Well, some of them are, and they are creepy. But you're scared of it because the part of your brain is convinced it's looking at something human that's also somehow wrong in all the ways. And that contradiction is one of the oldest alarms our species has. You know that one relative who's had a little DIY craft stuff work done, and every family photo feels slightly off in a way nobody wants to say out loud at Thanksgiving? Same system, same alarm. Nobody's being cruel. Your face detector is just quietly filing a report it wasn't asked for. This same face system does something even stranger, and you don't need a robot or a doll to see it happen. You just need a mirror, a dim room, and about a minute of your own patience. An Italian vision scientist ran an experiment where he sat 50 ordinary, healthy people in front of a mirror in a dimly lit room, lit by nothing stronger than a small lamp, and had them simply stare at their own reflected face for 10 minutes straight. Nothing tricky about the setup. They didn't have any drugs or sleep deprivation, just a normal face in a dim mirror. Within about a minute, nearly every single person started seeing their own face distort. 2 out of 3 watched their features warp, stretch, and shift in the mirror. This could be a great horror movie, don't you agree? So, close to half saw the face turn into something monstrous. More than a quarter saw a completely unfamiliar stranger looking back at them instead of themselves. Some saw the face of a parent, living or dead. Some saw an animal. Every one of the 50 reported a real uncomfortable feeling that the face in the mirror had stopped being theirs. The likely explanation ties directly back to the same face detection system we talked about, combined with something called visual adaptation. The way your visual system starts to lose its grip on any image it stares at without moving. Dim lighting strips away color information and fine detail, giving your face detection system less real data to lock onto, while your eyes, staying mostly still on that one target for a minute at a time, start losing their normal grip on the image. Your brain is still so sure it's looking at a face because that system never turns off, but it now has less real information to build that face out of, and less real information means more room for the gap filling machine to take over. And if you ever played Bloody Mary or Candyman, if you or your friends saw something, this could be the reason. One more version of this doesn't even need a real face at all, just the shape of one. Take a mask. And I know you just thought of Michael Myers, didn't you? So, the mask, the kind with a face molded into it, and turn it inside out. So you're looking at the hollow, concave back of it instead of the raised front. Light it up from the front and stand back a bit, and something strange will happen. Your brain refuses to see it as hollow. It sees a normal, convex face bulging outward, exactly like a real one would, even though your eyes are receiving information that clearly says the opposite. Walk from one side of the room to the other while looking at it, and the illusion gets even stranger. The face appears to turn and follow you, tracking your every movement like something alive, when in reality, nothing is turning at all. You're just looking at the same hollow shape from a different angle each time. Vision researchers consider this one of the clearest proofs that your brain doesn't build what you see purely from the raw light hitting your eyes. It builds what you see from a strong built-in assumption. In this case, faces stick out, they don't cave in. And that assumption is so deeply wired that it overrides direct depth information from both eyes working together. Show someone a hollow face and tell them exactly what they're looking at, and their brains still insist on flipping it the wrong way. Knowing the trick doesn't break the trick. That's how strong the underlying rule is. Your visual system would rather quietly lie to you in a predictable direction than admit it's looking at something faces almost never actually do. I love this one because it means our brain, when handed clear proof it's wrong, just doubles down anyway. So the face and voice systems explain the shape and the sound. Uncanny Valley explains why almost human is worse than not human at all. The mirror shows you that even your own reflection isn't protected from the same machine. And the hollow mask proves your brain will bend reality itself, then accept a face that doesn't behave the way a face is supposed to. But none of that explains why an empty hallway feels so much scarier than a crowded one, even when the empty hallway is, on paper, safer. That's a different piece of the same machine, and it comes down to one idea. Uncertainty is worse than knowing, almost every time, even when you'd be certain about is bad. People were told that they might receive one and could choose to get it over with immediately or wait and possibly get a smaller shock later instead. Logic says wait for the better outcome. A lot chose the worst shock sooner just to end the waiting. When researchers looked at brain activity during that stretch of not knowing, the region tied to processing pain and discomfort was working harder during the anticipation when it was during the actual shock. Think about it. The dread of the thing was measurably worse inside the brain than the thing itself. That's your empty hallway, your back rooms. A crowded hallway gives you threat detection, a clear picture, people, sound, whatever information it can actually use. An empty one gives it almost nothing, and nothing is exactly what that system feels on its own, badly, with the worst possible guess. It's not that the empty hallway is more dangerous, it's that your brain has less real data and more room to think about a threat inside the gap. And building dread out of silence is something it's great at. This exact same mechanism is running every single day under a name most of you already use without knowing the psychology behind it. Doom scrolling, the compulsive habit of endlessly pulling up bad news you already know is going to upset you, has been the subject of a wave of new research over the past couple of years. And the pattern researchers keep landing on traces straight back to the exact mechanism we just covered. Not really the news itself. Studies tracking this behavior have found it's driven by something researchers call intolerance of uncertainty. That same unbearable itch of not knowing, and scrolling functions as an attempt to resolve it. To finally get the update that closes the gap. Except the feed never actually closes the gap. It just keeps opening new ones, one unresolved, alarming headline after another. So the itch never actually gets scratched. It just increases in anxiety, depression, and disrupted sleep. And one study found even a single sitting of prolonged negative news scrolling measurably raised stress hormone levels for hours afterward. You're not weak for struggling to put down the phone during a stressful stretch of news. You're doing the exact same thing as people in that shock study, choosing to check now, then sit inside an unresolved gap. Except the phone in your pocket offers you an infinite supply of new gaps to check, one scroll at a time, forever. When's the last time you told yourself one more scroll and then looked up 40 minutes later with a completely different personality? We've all been there. You went in for the weather, you came out with strong opinions about a stranger's divorce. Now, for someone I bet you'd never expect this to show up, a completely different sense than the ones I've given you so far. Smell. Researchers ran people through a mask and told them they might inhale a substance linked to disease. Half were told exactly when it might come through. The other half were told it could happen at any moment. No warning at all. The actual air moving through both masks was identical the entire time. The group with no warning window rated their anxiety significantly higher, and their skin conductance, a direct physical measure of stress, spiked harder and stayed elevated longer. Same air, same everything. The only thing that changed was that the brain had a window to predict inside of. Certainty about something bad coming at a specific moment costs your body less than an open ended maybe hanging over you with no edges. That's why I hate the do you want the good news or bad news first? Always give me the bad news. This face system can break in one more way, rare but real, and possibly the strangest one in this entire episode. It's called Capgras syndrome, and it shows up in some cases of brain injury, dementia, and certain psychiatric conditions. A person with this condition looks at their spouse, mother, whoever, and recognizes every single physical detail correctly: the eyes, voice, exact shape of their face, and they become completely convinced this person is an imposter, a stranger wearing a familiar face. The leading explanation lines up with everything we've covered. Recognizing someone you love actually runs on two separate systems working together. One system matches the face in front of you to your stored memory of what that person looks like. A second, completely separate system delivers the emotional jolt that's supposed to come with seeing someone you love. That small warm spike that happens automatically and usually goes completely unnoticed because it's so fast and so constant. The connection between those two systems get damaged. The first system still works perfectly, so the face gets correctly identified. The second system stays silent, so the emotional spike that's supposed to arrive with that identification never shows up. Your brain now has two pieces of contradictory information sitting side by side, and then accepting a plain explanation like the wiring between two brain regions being damaged, the brain builds a story instead. This isn't really them, running the identical gap filling instinct that shows up. Just aim at the most possible target, someone's own family or a loved one, turning the people closest to them into strangers wearing a disguise. Time to flip everything I've told you so far completely on its head, because this next part proves the brain's monster machine doesn't only build things that terrify us. Sometimes, under the exact right conditions, it builds us a protector instead. In 1916, after a ship got crushed in Antarctic ice, the explorer Ernest Shackleton led two other men on a brutal, exhausting trek across frozen, unmapped terrain to reach help. All three men later admitted separately that they'd felt a fourth presence walking with them the entire way, guiding them, though nobody else was physically there. That specific detail inspired a line in a famous poem, and it turns out that Shackleton's crew is far from the only account like it. Mountaineers stranded near the top of the world's highest peak have described the exact same thing: a companion nobody can see, offering direction right when they were closest to giving up, and sailors lost at sea, and soldiers pinned down in combat have reported it too, right alongside survivors pulled from wreckage and disaster. A man who escaped one of the towers of September 11th described a voice insisting he turn around and go a different way, a decision that likely saved his life. Researchers who studied this call it sense presence phenomenon, and it's around a specific set of conditions: extreme isolation, physical exhaustion, cold, low oxygen, sleep deprivation, and real fear for your life. Often several of these stacked on top of each other all at once. So let's bring it back down to something closer to home. Sitting in a waiting room before a test result comes back is worse than actually hearing bad news, because bad news is something concrete your brain can finally respond to. Instead of endlessly predicting, Someone going quiet on you. A text left on read produces the same effect. Your mind doesn't rest in that silence. It fills it, usually with the worst version of events it can make up. Because unfilled gap is intolerable to a system built to always have an answer ready. This is exactly the trick every good horror director already knows in their bones. The scariest stretch of almost any good horror movie sits in the 10 minutes before the jump scare ever appears. The hallway, the creaking floor, silent stretch just past comfortable. The second the entity shows up, the uncertainty ends and a huge amount of the fear drains out right along with it. Directors who understand this hold the reveal as long as they possibly can because they know the gap is scarier than whatever's filling it. Expecting something bad is sometimes enough to actually produce it physically in your own body. No darkness or silence required. Doctors have a name for it, the nocebo effect, the evil twin of the placebo effect. Tell someone a treatment might cause a headache, and a real number of them get a headache, even when what they actually took was completely inert. Before we get to the most extreme version, one thing's worth knowing about why certain specific shapes get singled out for dread in the first place. Long before a child ever learns a single scary story from anyone, babies pair the sight of a moving snake with a fearful voice far more readily than they paired a moving elephant with the same fearful voice. Evidence they were already primed to link that particular shape with danger before language, before stories, or a single lived experience with a real snake. Researchers describe this as an evolved fear module, a system churned by an extremely long stretch of shared history between early primates and venomous predators, wired in deep enough that it shows up in a baby too, young to have learned it from anyone. I bet some of you just thought about the cat and the cucumber. This is worth thinking about because it means not everything your brain builds gets invented fresh in the moment. Some of the shapes were preloaded a long time before you were born, ready and waiting for the first coat on a hanger, the first curved shadow, or the unexplained shape in the grass to come along and fill them. The most extreme version of all of this proves just how far your brain will go once you take away almost everything real for it to work with. Our brain constantly predicts what should be out there using a steady stream of real information coming in through our senses. Take that real information away almost entirely, and the predicting doesn't stop. It can't stop. That's not how the system is built. It just starts running on nothing but its own guesses, with no incoming data left to correct it. Left alone with itself for long enough, your own brain will make up company, sound, touch, danger, whatever it needs to fill a science it was never built to sit inside. In a young child, the same gap runs even wider. That explains to some parents that have lived through it without ever fully understanding why. Somewhere between ages 3 and 6, a child's imagination goes through an explosion. They can suddenly build entire worlds in their head, characters, stories, monsters with real personalities. That's a real developmental leap, and it's wonderful for creativity. The problem is the part of the brain responsible for checking whether a thought is realistic doesn't finish developing until well into someone's 20s. You heard me, 20s. And a 4 or 5-year-old is barely switched on at all. So when a child pictures a monster in the closet, the fear centered part of their brain fires exactly as hard as it would for something real, because there's no fully built gatekeeper yet to tell it the difference. Close to 3 out of 4 kids between 4 and 12 report real nightmare fears, running on the same predicting machine we talked about, in a brain that hasn't finished building the part that knows when to stop believing its own guesses. Nothing's wrong with them. Everything so far in this episode has been about your brain manufacturing threats that weren't really there. Here's the flip side, worth knowing because it happens during a real one, and it explains something that trips up police reports and courtrooms constantly. Put someone in a room and have a man walk past, holding an ordinary pen with grease on his hands. Then ask them to identify him later, and they'll usually manage it. Run the identical setup, except this time the man is holding a knife, and identification accuracy drops hard, sometimes by close to a third. Researchers tracking where people eyes actually go during a threatening encounter found the same pattern over and over. Witnesses spend far more time looking directly at the weapon than the face of a person holding it. This is called the weapon focus effect. And the leading explanation is that real fear doesn't broaden your attention to take in everything happening around you. It does the opposite, narrowing it down hard onto the single most dangerous point in the entire scene and letting almost everything else, including the exact face you'll be asked to identify later, blur into the background. So think about it this way. An imagined threat gets your brain filling in gaps with entities that were never there. A real threat does something closer to the opposite, stripping detail away from everything except the danger itself. So the face attached to it barely gets recorded at all. Make-believe fear builds too much. Real fear in the moment records too little. Both are the identical system turned for survival first and accuracy a distant second, whether the danger in front of you is real or not. The fastest fear response your body has, faster than every mechanism we've covered, combined, happens completely outside your control every single time. A sudden loud noise, a hand on your shoulder you didn't see coming, a shape lunging into view, and your whole body flinches before you've had a single conscious thought about what just happened. This is the acoustic startle reflex, and it runs through a short, simple circuit connecting your ears straight to your spine and your major muscle groups, bypassing the slower thinking parts of your brain. It fires in a tenth of a second, sometimes less, long before the part of your brain capable of recognizing, oh, that was just my sister, could possibly weigh in. This is why a jump scare works on some, even when they know when it's going to happen. Knowing doesn't show the reflex down even slightly because the reflex was never rooted through the part of you that knows things in the first place. It is so raw and fast. Some fears arrive before you can explain it at all, not built from a shape or a sound, but from your own body, quietly, you're not consciously aware of. Damage the part of the brain responsible for generating that quiet physical signal, and the pattern breaks completely. This is called somatic markers, a physical hunch your body builds and hands to you before your conscious mind has described right before something goes wrong. The one that arrives with no clear evidence attached yet is your body finishing its threat calculation, a full step ahead of the part of you that puts feeling into words, nothing mystical or magical about it. There is a whole industry that studies these exact same glitches on purpose and builds entire careers out of triggering them. And once you know what to listen and look for, you'll never watch a horror film the same way again. Start with the infrasound section from earlier because filmmakers have known about this trick for decades, even if they didn't hear of Vic Tandy's name. The director Gaspar Noé has openly admitted to laying a tone around 27 cycles per second, just above true infrasound, through the first half hour of his film Irreversible, specifically to make audiences physically nervous and disoriented before a single disturbing image even appears on screen. And it works. It did even on me. He told an interviewer flat out that in a theater with a strong enough subwoofer, people end up more frightened by the sound than by what they're actually watching. Sound designers on the Paranormal Activity franchise and the Conjuring films have described doing the same. Not to be heard consciously, you have to feel it. Music does its own version of this using a trick that goes back centuries before any horror film existed. There is a specific interval in music, sometimes called the devil's interval, that sits exactly halfway between two notes, an octave apart, refusing to resolve cleanly into anything comfortable no matter which direction your ears tries to pull it. Medieval church authorities considered it so unsettling they reportedly discouraged its use entirely. Horror composers have leaned on it for exactly that same unresolved, wrong feeling ever since. Then there's the silence, and this ties directly back to the uncertainty research from earlier. The shock study, the empty hallway, a sound designer working on a tense scene will strip out nearly everything. Distant traffic, room tone, even a character's own breathing, right before a jump scare because a sudden absence of normal background noise reads to your subconscious as a red flag. Practical effects and creature design lean directly on the uncanny valley. This is also why old, warped analog recordings show up constantly in horror soundtracks. A voice singing slightly off pitch through vintage tape hiss, you recognize exactly what it's supposed to be. Something about it is still wrong. The gap is the uncanny valley again, just running through your ears this time instead of your eyes. A good horror film stops being something that just happens to you and starts being something you can actually watch happen in real time. So every mechanism in this episode builds the fear in the moment. What happens next is a separate problem because once your brain has built a shade, voice, presence, it doesn't file that experience away as an unexplained blip. It goes looking for more evidence to back up the story it already settled on. And it's good at finding exactly that. This is the same tendency researchers call confirmation bias, showing up in one of its most convincing costumes. Walk into a building already told it's haunted, and an ordinary creak becomes proof. A cold draft from an old window becomes a sign. Your own memory starts quietly editing itself too, sanding down the parts that don't fit the story. Our brain was never built to passively record the world exactly as it is. It was built to predict what should be there and only bother checking reality when something doesn't match the prediction. Most of what you experience as seeing and hearing is your brain's best guess, filled in ahead of time with the real raw information from your eyes and ears, only used to correct the guess when it's wrong. Under good lighting with plenty of information, the guess and reality line up so well you never notice the gap. Take away the light and the sound. The gap widens, and your brain, true to form, doesn't leave it empty. It fills it fast with whatever fits the mood of the moment, which at 3 in the morning in an empty, dark house is always creepy. So the next time something in the dark makes your whole body go cold, or an empty room feels wrong for no reason, or silence from someone you care about spins you into the worst case story, you're not broken and you're not overreacting. You're watching an ancient, reliable survival system doing exactly what kept your ancestors alive. Applied to a modern world that mostly doesn't have predators in it anymore. Mostly. Just coats on hangers and unanswered texts. Knowing that won't stop the jump scare. The system doesn't ask permission, and it isn't going to start now. But it does mean you get to add one sentence after the jolt hits. One your ancestors never had the luxury of adding. That's probably nothing. Thank you for being a part of the Dominion, and I'll see you in the next one.